Genetics in the open, quiet baseline shifts and surveillance. If genetics is the theater, here's the part that plays under bright lights. In the late 90s and 2000s, state newborn screening programs expanded, first for metabolic disorders, then dozens of conditions. Public health wins are real. Early detection saves lives. But a quiet side effect followed in many states: residual blood spot storage. Tiny heel prick cards, kept for years in state labs or partner facilities, often without explicit, informed consent. When parents asked where the spots went, answers varied: quality control, validation, research. The policies were legal in many places. They weren't always obvious. This is where dual use creeps in. Stored blood spots create population baselines, timestamped snapshots of genetics, and, increasingly, epigenetic marks. Health departments frame it as preparedness. Researchers call it a gold mine. Meanwhile, privacy advocates point out that retention plus linkage equals surveillance potential. Court cases in places like Texas and Minnesota forced purges or opt-out reforms, but the trend never reversed nationwide. Some states now disclose, some let you destroy the sample, and others default to retention unless you fight the paper. Blood donor standards shifted too. Screening improved for safety, but the data trails got thicker. Donor histories, infectious disease markers, HLA typing for certain programs. Each category serves medicine, yet builds a shadow map of population health. Hospitals share de-identified data. Vendors move it across systems. Re-identification risks, once theoretical, now sit one sloppy crosswalk away from a name. Then came the consumer DNA boom. Spit in a tube, meet your relatives, maybe learn a risk allele. Millions signed up. Few expected their data to jump lanes into law enforcement. It did, first with high-profile homicide cases, then with formalized warrants and platform policy changes. Companies promised opt-ins and transparency. Still, the infrastructure exists, a giant, user-funded kinship engine. It feels like entertainment until a third cousin's upload pulls your family into a government file. Military genomics moved in parallel. Projects aimed at performance and resilience, muscle recovery, hypoxia tolerance, traumatic brain injury susceptibility. These are legitimate research programs with review boards and protocols. Yet they sit at the seam where medicine meets mission. Who owns the resulting baselines? How long are they kept? What happens when a trait hinting at future illness collides with a security clearance review? Official answers stress de-identification and ethics. FOIA releases surrounding these topics often arrive with the telling black bars: methodology intact, identifiers masked, partner lists missing. Now layer the overlaps. Civilian hospitals serving base populations. Academic medical centers with defense grants. Private labs contracting for both state screening and federal pilot studies. Data custodianship blurs. Chain of custody gets complicated. One inbox holds IRB approvals. Another stores non-disclosable MOUs. When a clinician flags an anomaly, the retest might route to a university today and a defense contractor tomorrow, each with different retention and disclosure rules. If you're a parent following the sample, you're tracing a path through jurisdictions, not just hallways. And the policy currents keep widening the channel. Interoperability mandates push health records towards centralized exchanges. Public health emergencies, pandemics most of all, normalize bulk data pulls, rapid linkages, and emergency waivers. The intention is protection. The habit that forms is access. Once labs automate just-in-case analyses, turning them off takes more political will than flipping them on ever did. Here's the part that ties back to the desert without leaning on belief. If an actor wanted to watch baselines drift, immune profiles bending, sleep-wake cycles adapting, calcium metabolism nudging, they'd need unobtrusive, repeatable sampling at scale. Newborn screening does that. Blood donation does that. Consumer DNA and hospital labs fill gaps. If the same regions that host training corridors also host high-throughput screening and research partnerships, the line between coincidence and convenience gets thin. Critics say this is paranoid. They're right that dual use doesn't equal misuse. They're also right that public health depends on data we share. But read the disclosures. Many programs allow secondary research. Many samples are retained by default. Oversight varies wildly by state, by institution, by contract. And the heaviest redactions tend to sit exactly where technology, defense, and biomedicine meet. That might be risk management. It might be something else. Meanwhile, families live in the middle. They sign consent forms, trust clinicians, and assume the heel prick is for their child, not a database. They don't see the algorithm sorting for outliers or the procurement memo adding a biomarker panel for a pilot. They see a lancet, a card, a label, and a promise that it's routine. Maybe it is. Or maybe routine is the point. Normalize the draw, normalize the storage, normalize the watching. This is the quiet shift. No saucers, no lights, just paperwork and pipelines humming. If genetics is the theater, the front of house looks like healthcare. The backstage is a machine that remembers. The alleged agenda, selection, editing, and social engineering. If the front of house is healthcare, the alleged agenda plays in the wings. Insiders used a vocabulary that didn't sound like conquest. It sounded like tuning. Lifespan compatibility, a phrase that suggests meeting in the middle of biology, so communication doesn't break across decades. Sensory tuning, adjusting how we process light, sound, and motion so encounters don't overload either side. Cognitive harmonization, nudging attention, sleep architecture, and stress response so interaction costs less. None of that requires a switch. It requires selection and time. Selection shows up in who gets watched. The stories that stack aren't random. Lineages with unusual night-wake resilience, kids who handle bright cold without complaint, adults who recover from fatigue faster than their peers. If you were curating a compatible population, you'd track those families softly. No big interventions, just extra check-ins, retests framed as routine, and invitations to follow-up studies that never quite end. You don't force evolution. You load the dice, roll often, and keep the gains. Editing, if the accounts are right, is light touch. Not crisper headlines, more like drift with a hand on the rudder. Microbiome nudges through neonatal exposures. Vitamin D pathway monitoring that subtly shifts thresholds for supplementation. Sleep training guidance that privileges darker rooms, cooler temperatures, tighter schedules, all sold as best practice and often defensible. If the outcome is a cohort that sleeps deeper in magnetic quiet and tolerates abrupt light changes better than their neighbors, who argues when the kids test fine? Get this, the alleged mechanisms hide in health nudges. Prenatal vitamins adjusted for trace minerals. Lactation advice that emphasizes nighttime feeds spaced across specific intervals. Pediatric guidance that normalizes narrowband lighting in nurseries. None of it screams editing. All of it can steer circadian resilience, calcium metabolism, vestibular sensitivity. If you've ever worked in a NICU, you know a policy change can ripple through thousands of infants in a year without a single press release. Then there's fertility. Families reported windows, hard years, then sudden ease, as if something outside their control opened and closed doors. Clinicians saw clusters of unexplained infertility that resolved after minor, poorly justified protocol changes. Was it chance? Maybe. Or it was selection by patients. Wait for the conditions you prefer, then allow conception under that umbrella. A managed drift isn't a lab project, it's a scheduling problem. The microstories land where science meets fog. One mother remembered a white room visit after a complicated birth. 10 minutes, soft voices, a nurse she'd never seen again. She signed a consent page that looked like the others. Later, she couldn't find it in the portal. She chalked the missing time up to exhaustion, until her daughter, at 3, could sleep through fireworks but woke to the hum of a broken dimmer. Another family moved after 2 pregnancies marked by midnight check-ins and unexplained bruises shaped like gentle clamps. In the new town, the night visits stopped. The pediatrician wrote, developmentally typical, on every note. Asymmetric intent runs through the claims. This is an empire. It's curation. You don't broadcast, you sample. You don't abduct, you request accommodation. You don't reshape a nation, you influence a subpopulation and watch it seed. Over a generation or 2, the trait distribution drifts. Not enough for headlines, enough for comfort in the rooms where contact happens. If that's real, we should see low-noise signals where they'd be easy to miss. Slightly altered distributions of vitamin D receptor variants in towns hugging test corridors. Sleep questionnaires trending toward shorter sleep onset latency in base-adjacent zip codes. Subtle differences in otolith-mediated balance tests among kids whose families report nocturnal visitors. None of it screams. All of it adds up if you look for convergent lines across independent data sets. Here's the uncomfortable fit with policy. Newborn screening provides the substrate, baseline cards attached to time and place. School health surveys add behavioral notes. Consumer wearables spill sleep metrics into the cloud. Military wellness programs collect resilience profiles, stitch them with analytics, and you can spot micro shifts without ever naming a cause. A careful actor would never own the pipeline. They'd surf it, or let policy currents carry them without leaving fingerprints. Social engineering in this context isn't propaganda. It's environment. Curriculum that encourages dimmer evening light. Urban plans that reduce high-frequency flicker in street lamps. Wellness campaigns that extol early morning sun and strict bedtime routines. All of it aligns with mainstream sleep science. All of it favors circadian robustness and sensory bandwidths some claim fit the visitor's comfort zone. If you're seeking harmonization, you let culture carry the load. Skeptics argue this reads malice into sensible health advice. Fair point. Good sleep helps everyone, but intent matters less than effect. If a third party benefits most when our habits narrow toward their preferred band, they don't need to deceive. They need to applaud. Meanwhile, families at the edge, the ones reporting visitors, become early adopters by necessity. They black out rooms, dampen EM noise, and schedule lives around quieter nights because it works. Their kids thrive. Their neighbors notice. Trends set. Which brings us back to the alleged goals: lifespan compatibility, sensory tuning, cognitive harmonization. None require us to lose ourselves. They do require a say. Consent is the line that turns a health nudge into a covert edit. If selection is happening through routine care, then the ethics don't live in a treaty. They live in a clipboard at 2 a.m., a checkbox that defaults to yes, and a family too tired to realize the trajectory that tiny choice sets. The deal theory: access for tech, silence for cooperation. If there's an agenda, someone had to make room for it. The classic bargain shows up in whispers the same way across decades: access for technology, silence for cooperation. Not a handshake on the runway, an accumulation of permissions. You keep the airspace quiet, we'll show you performance that breaks your instruments. You let the clinical visits run smoothly, we'll leave you with materials that won't melt at hypersonic edges. The story runs on reciprocity and compartmentalization. Technology breadcrumbs are the bait people point to. Radar operators remember nights when returns bloomed and vanished as if the sky had seams. Range logs, when you can see them, note unconventional performance without attribution. Engineers talk off record about samples that behave like layered metamaterials, bending signals in ways textbooks barely catch up to. You won't find a memo that says tall white alloy. You'll find contracts that fund anomalous signature suppression and high-entropy laminates with strict need-to-know firewalls. The implication is simple: something inspired this line of research, and the timelines line up with the encounters. Then there are the craft anecdotes that stick because they're consistent. Security escorts describe lights that accelerate without transition, like frames missing from a reel. Pilots briefed on don't chase rules that contradict the bravado of the culture. A hangar crew hears a hum through concrete and swears they saw heat shimmer where no exhaust touched air. None of it is proof. All of it maps to a pattern. We observe, we try to emulate, and we accept access in trade for keeping the lid on. Human cost narratives complicate the deal. Early abduction stories crash against the newer clinical visit frame. Appointments instead of grabs, requests instead of restraints, consent that reads like a default setting. Families who say they learned to negotiate, lights on, no touching the child while asleep, parents present, also say the visitors listened up to a point. The shift suggests pressure from somewhere. If institutions agree to accommodate, the visitors don't have to act like burglars. They enter through the clinic, not the window. Institutional compartmentalization makes the bargain possible. Need to know slices the pie so thin that nobody sees the whole thing. A range commander knows buffer zones and schedule windows. A hospital liaison knows which infants get follow-up under a pilot code. A contractor builds a sensor that rejects spurious returns in a band nobody admits is relevant. Each actor follows a policy that sounds reasonable in isolation. Together, the policies form a corridor. You can walk a family down that corridor without ever saying why the doors exist, only that it's routine. Deniability isn't just a tactic, it's a design feature. Contracts route through primes, then through subsidiaries, then through academic centers. Oversight boards review protocols with sanitized aims. Freedom of Information Act responses arrive with the sharp edges blacked out. Partner names, locations, non-conventional performance stripped of context. The official line remains: advanced research, interagency coordination, nothing to see. Meanwhile, the deliverables keep landing: better radar filters, materials that shrug at temperature extremes, and test reports that describe physics the public doesn't get to read. Here's the counter from critics who live in black programs. You don't need aliens to explain any of this. A classified aerospace ecosystem can simulate contact to mask human testing. You want a community to accept odd lights and quiet corridors? Seed a story that explains them without naming your project. You want samples from birth clusters near a range? Tie a public health pilot to a logistics schedule. The ruse protects the program and blunts protest. In that telling, the tall white lore is cover smoke, not source code. But that critique meets friction at the human edge. If it's all simulation, why do families report adjustments that responders honor? Why do briefings teach range etiquette that mirrors the visitor's stated preferences? Why do some clinicians describe requests that follow social rules nobody would invent for intimidation? PsyOps can fake fear. It's harder to fake courtesy across thousands of quiet interactions unless accommodation is reciprocated. What a deal would require mechanically is predictable access points, airspace windows for transit, clinical windows for sampling, and a channel for tech exchange. The first two exist by policy. The third exists by implication. Materials that appear where no procurement line explains their origin, performance leaps that coincide with periods of intense encounter lore. Nobody signs the contract. Everybody behaves as if one exists. The price is silence. Not total, structured. Speak in euphemism. Move anomalies to special logs. Treat redactions like fences. When a cluster event threatens to spill into daylight, activate the contamination narrative, the pilot study memo, the vendor audit. Let the public argue about data rights while the visits continue under a new code name. It's not a conspiracy in a smoky room. It's a bureaucracy following its own inertia toward the path of least resistance. And yet, there's a ceiling to trade. Every access has a boundary. Families who say no learn how hard it is to enforce a refusal against a culture trained to default to yes. Clinicians who push back find themselves off a project, not in a conspiracy. Engineers who ask where a sample came from get told to focus on the test, not the source. That's how a deal hides in plain sight. It rewards compliance with interesting work and punishes friction with boredom. So the theory stands on three legs. Tech arrives with no clear provenance, cooperation normalizes unusual access, and silence keeps the parts from snapping together. If you want to see whether those legs hold weight, don't chase lights. Read the procurement trails, the pilot study codes, the emails that move a simple heel prick into a long-term archive under an acronym nobody can expand in public. Document trails, FOIAs, redactions, and what the files suggest. If the deal lives anywhere, it lives in paperwork, or in the absence of it. We filed, others filed, and the government responded the way it always does when technology brushes biology near the ranges, with pages that look like snowstorms of black ink. FOIA logs themselves tell part of the story. You see the spike in requests clustering around aerial anomalies, biomedical surveillance, and interagency pilots, and the same exemption codes appearing where the two domains touch. You also see the pattern of no records, in places where people on the ground swear the meetings happened, and records located, followed by releases so redacted they function as silhouettes. Start with aerial tech. Requests for range telemetry tied to nights of unconventional performance routinely come back with method sections intact and sources masked.